The next thing, they give you two props with this airplane. And I've heard a lot of people mention this, and I had the same problem, is these props do not come balanced. In fact, they are way out of balance when you get them. So you will have to balance the props on a prop balancer before you use them. I haven't found anybody that said that they came already balanced for them. And in order to do that, I use electrical tape on the light side. I put the tape on the back side of the blade to try to bring it back close to balance, and then I may have to add a little bit of tape to the hub on the side in order to finalize the balance. It takes a little bit to do it because they're way out of balance, but you can balance them. Now for the modifications that you actually have to do to the airplane. One of the thing about this airplane is no cooling to the electronics. You have this artificial radial engine backplate in here, and that backplate, when it comes, it covers up everything. Only thing sticking out is the shaft for the motor. So no air gets into the cowling to cool anything. So what you have to do is you have to cut out between two of the cylinders to get cooling to the speed controller. The electronic speed controller is down in the bottom, just like on most airplanes where you have an outrunner engine. Now this plastic decorated piece here, it looks like the motor. It's up against a fixed bulkhead that has a cup in it to where the motor can mount inside that little cutout cup. So if you was to all the way around this thing, there's nothing but a bulkhead behind this. There's only one small opening in that bulkhead that goes back in there, and that's for the wires to the motor, to the speed controller, and that's down on the bottom. So it's on the bottom around the 6 o'clock position where you'll cut out that opening, and you'll open up the opening in that back wall that goes to the speed controller, and you allow air to get through there. I was hoping to get some air up to the battery, but I discovered that there's no hole in the bulkhead up here. So even if I cut out between these cylinders, I'm just going to be against a foam bulkhead. There's nothing there. Now, the middle here, I got this from Pilot Robert and Captain Blosh over at the Slovenian boys. This piece here actually extends all the way down to the prop shaft. It's like a dome all the way around, a plastic dome. The problem I had is the same thing that they had, was that the cutout of the dome was actually contacting the motor. This is one of these outrunners where the outer housing rotates, and it was rubbing against that dome. So I did the same thing that Pilot Robert did, is I just trimmed away that dome. I may have trimmed away more than I needed to, but I trimmed away enough to expose the screws that mount the motor. That way, if I have to change this motor, I don't have to peel off the entire outer cowling. I have access to the screws because I cut out that dome. You can see the screws back there. That also allows cooling air to get back to the motor, so the motor won't overheat. Hopefully, anyway. So that's that those two areas right there. The last thing you need to cool is the battery. There's no way back to the battery from the front for cooling, for air. So you're going to have to find a way to go back to the battery compartment and put some cooling air in. And I did the same thing that Pilot Robert did, because I did that on the cover, the battery cover. This also brings up another issue with the battery cover. There's three issues with the battery cover. One of them is the cooling for the battery, and the other is getting the cover on and off. And the third one is the strength of the magnets. Out of the box, one of the things you'll find is the magnet strength is pretty weak, and it's easy to pop off the battery cover. And a lot of people said that they had a problem in flight with them popping off. One of the things I did to solve the problem with getting a grip on it, because the battery cover takes up the entire forward seat and it comes all the way up to here. But as you can tell, the top wing blocks all of the access to it. So what I did is I took a couple toothpicks and I drove the toothpicks down about 1/2 inch into the foam and I glued them in there. I cut them off square here and here, and after the glue dried I just painted these red so I have points of being able to pick them up. Some people just use one in the center. You can, depends on how you want to do it. For some reason I just opted to put two. That way it's easy to pull the thing out. Now, to cool this battery off, like I say, there's no hole in the forward bulkhead for air to come through. So you have to create a hole if you want to cool this battery off. So I chose to use the battery cover. If you look inside the battery cover, you can see where the battery sits along here. There's a space right up here in the front where the foam is relatively thin, like 1/4 inch. I chose that spot to make what I call a NACA duct. A NACA duct on an airplane is just a flush duct on the fuselage that draws air in. On a RC plane, it's very similar to what a cheater hole would be if you want to supply extra air to, let's say, an EDF jet motor. Sometimes you make a cheater hole to give it more air. What it is I'm going to show you in a pictorial diagram here. Well, we'll look at this first. It's a slanted, it's a slanted cutout. It slants down in an angle into the foam. The back side also is slanted in order to deflect the air. Look at the inside here. You can see how the top of it slanted back too. So when the air comes in, it's deflected down into the compartment. If used just to make that cut flush, like a square hole, the air will have a tendency to bounce around at the opening. But here, because I got two slanted, angled down cuts, the air is drawn in and the top piece deflects it into the compartment. And because this compartment is like a well, the air deflects off that top of the cutout and hits this. Try to get my hand in here. Here's my pointer. The air deflects off of this angled cutout and bounces off this bulkhead, and it's able to cool the top of the battery. So that's how I have it designed. Of course, it's October now. I don't really need it because this time of the year the battery stays cold most of the time anyway. But in the summertime, I think it's going to be essential to be able to cool that battery off. So here's what I use to lift it up out, the cover out, and now you have the cooling hole. The last thing about this cover is what I mentioned before, is the magnets. Your magnets are inside the fuselage on these shelves. The cover just has the metallic contact points. The problem is when you get this thing, these metal plates, they're actually got little prongs on both ends. It's a flat little metal plate, sheet of metal, and it's got a prong pointed down here and a prong pointed down here. But they're mounted down into the foam to where there's actually space between the metal and the top part here. So it doesn't actually contact the magnets. So when you put the cover on, it's on very loosely and you can barely feel the magnet. And a lot of people said their covers would fly off in flight. So I did what other people did. You get a nail underneath fingernails underneath the flat piece of metal here, and you can pull the piece of metal right out, and the two prongs would come right out of their little slots. I put a piece of plastic underneath just to give it, to raise the base in there a little bit more, and then I glued it back down again, so now that the metal is up flush, if not even sticking out a little more on the cover. After that dries, you'll find that your magnet catches. You hear that? And stays.